You know, the official version. It's boring. They tell us the asteroid belt is just construction debris, the leftovers of a planet that Jupiter, our big neighbor, kept from ever coming together. It sounds logical, clean, and most likely, completely wrong. It assumes the universe follows our boring physics textbook, that it's all neat and orderly. My experience tells me that when something seems too simple, you're missing the point. Let's apply some basic principles. What's more likely? A slow, random process that failed, or a fast, catastrophic event? The history of the universe is full of bangs, not whimpers. So what if the asteroid belt isn't a cradle, but a crime scene? A grave? A fifth planet, which some called Phaeton, existed. And then, it didn't. And if that's the case, it wasn't an accident. It was a deliberate act. An engineered solution. And that brings us to the really important question. Who pushed the button? It all started with a signal in the noise. We get petabytes of data, and our AIs filter out 99.9% of it as junk. But one intern at Palomar, a kid who apparently drinks way too much coffee, decided to dig through that junk. And he found it. An anomaly. We called it Tri-Eye Atlas. At first, we thought it was a comet. Then, an asteroid. But the more data we got, the less sense those labels made. The object was too symmetrical. Too quiet. It moved with a precision that was just unnerving. Of course, everyone remembered Oumuamua. That strange interstellar visitor was an anomaly, sure. But Tri-Eye Atlas is an upgrade. Oumuamua was a scout. This looks like the main ship. And now that we've pointed the James Webb at it, we've gotten data that has shut up all the skeptics. Tri-Eye Atlas isn't just a rock. It's technology. Look at the trajectory. It's pure insanity. Interstellar objects don't behave like this. They fly by on a hyperbola. But this one, it slowed down. It used our planet's gravity the way we use it for our probes. It's called a gravitational chain. It used Jupiter to decrease its speed and Saturn to correct its course. The maneuver's efficiency was almost to 100%. We dream of numbers like that at SpaceX. Our guys at JPL ran a simulation. 1,000,000 times. Not once could a random body replicate this path. The probability is 0. Not statistically low, but 0. This isn't drift. This is piloting. It avoided all the dangerous zones, all the debris fields, as if it had a map it made long before it arrived. And then Webb sent the data. The heat signature, it's not passive, it's pulsing, rhythmically, like the cooling system of a running processor. Spectrography showed materials we've never seen before. Compounds based on metallic hydrogen. Looks like armor. And the internal structure? It's hollow. It's a hull. A frame. But here's the real game changer. The signal. A low-frequency electromagnetic pulse, repeating every 147 seconds. The signature is identical to a pulsar in the Crab Nebula. But the object has no power source for such a signal. It's not generating it. It's broadcasting it. Is this a communication protocol? And yes, we checked the Oumuamua archives. Right before it disappeared, it emitted the same signal. Once. Faintly. We wrote it off as interference. Now we understand it was a ping. And Tri-Eye Atlas is the answer. Loud and clear. So the hypothesis of an exploded planet Phaeton stops being science fiction and becomes the primary working theory. Because if Tri-Eye Atlas is a machine, if its path is not random, then we have to ask ourselves, is this its first time here? Or has it returned to the scene of the crime? This is why we must become an interplanetary species. Not because it's cool, but because one day we might have to deal with those who clear planets out of their way. And we'd better be ready for it. Imagine for a moment. Eons ago, when the solar system was young, A fifth planet orbited between Mars and Jupiter. Maybe a water world, like Earth. Maybe a failed gas giant. It doesn't matter. What matters is that it was there. And at some point, something entered our system. Something like Tri-Eye Atlas. But not for observation. Not for diplomacy. It had a different purpose. This radical hypothesis is built on several new, disturbing pieces of data that have started coming in not just from the James Webb, but from a completely unexpected source: the analysis of the asteroids themselves. Recent missions like Psyche and Lucy have shown that the belt's asteroids aren't just uniform rocks. They are strangely diverse. Some are frozen clumps of ice and dust. Others are pure metal, like the exposed core of a shattered planet. But there's a third, most mysterious category. Asteroids with anomalous crystalline structures. Their surfaces look as if they weren't subjected to a collision, but to an extremely powerful, focused energy field. The crystals inside them have been rearranged, tempered in a way that could only happen with an instantaneous and incredibly powerful, resonant force. This doesn't look like the result of an impact. A collision would have shattered the rock, leaving chaotic debris. Here, we see something else. A structural violation at the molecular level, as if someone found the planet's own resonant frequency and amplified it until it shattered, like a wine glass breaking from a specific musical note. It's called resonant collapse, and it doesn't require brute force, but incredible precision. The kind of precision Tri-Eye Atlas demonstrates in every single maneuver. And this is where the Webb data and the asteroid analysis converge on one chilling point. That low-frequency pulse coming from Tri-Eye Atlas every 147 seconds, its harmonics, its overtones, they match, with mathematical precision, the resonant frequencies that could shatter a silicate planetary core the size of Phaethon. We thought it was talking to someone. What if it's just humming an old tune? The tune of destruction that was already played here once before. This idea sounds like science fiction, but it explains what the standard model can't. It explains the strange tempering of some asteroids. It explains the chemical anomalies, the presence of isotopes that could only form under extreme energy exposure, not a slow accretion process. And most importantly, it explains Tri-Eye Atlas's trajectory. It's not just passing by. It's moving on a path that is perfectly aligned with the barycenter of the asteroid belt, the exact point in space where Phaeton's center of mass might once have been. It's returning to the scene of the crime. But why? Here, we enter the realm of pure speculation, each hypothesis more terrifying than the last. Hypothesis 1. The cosmic janitor. What if life isn't a rare miracle but a dangerous infection that some ancient force in the universe keeps under control? What if life was beginning on Phaeton, but it was the wrong kind? Predatory, unstable. And Tri-Eye Atlas, or its predecessor, was the instrument for sterilization. It arrived, assessed the threat, and eliminated it before it could spread. In this scenario, its current visit is a routine checkup. It's come back to make sure the infection hasn't reappeared on the neighboring planet, on Earth. And its silent observation isn't curiosity, it's diagnostics. Hypothesis 2. The Harvester. This version is even more alien to our understanding. What if, to some higher intelligence, planets aren't homes for life, but just resources? The way we harvest crops, they might have harvested Phaeton. Resonant collapse might not have been an act of destruction, but a mining technique. A way to release rare elements from the planet's core, collect them, and move on. The asteroid belt, in this case, is just industrial waste. And the return of Tri-Eye Atlas is a visit to an old mine to see if a new fruit has ripened. Our planet, rich in water and complex organics, might look especially appetizing Hypothesis. 3. The darkest. The doomsday weapon. What if Tri-Atlas isn't an independent actor, but just a weapon left over from an ancient, incomprehensible war? Billions of years ago, two titanic civilizations clashed, and our solar system was caught in the line of fire. Phaeton wasn't the target, but collateral damage. It was destroyed not out of malice, but simply because it was in the way, like we might uproot a tree to build a road. In this scenario, Tri-Atlas is a drifting, ownerless machine, an autonomous weapon still carrying out its last program, unaware that the war ended long ago, and its return isn't intentional, but a glitch, an echo of a long silent battle. But even an old, forgotten weapon can still fire. Whichever of these hypotheses is true, it turns our understanding of the cosmos upside down. We look to the stars searching for intelligent brothers. What if all that's out there are predators, gardeners, and the ghosts of long-lost wars? What if the great filter that Enrico Fermi talked about isn't a technological barrier that civilizations can't overcome, but an external factor? What if it's something like Tri-Atlas that comes and resets the board as soon as a civilization becomes noticeable enough to attract its attention? And we have become noticeable. We've been shouting into space with our radio signals for almost 100 years. We send probes carrying maps of our location. And now we've pointed our most powerful telescope at it and are staring intently. Maybe Oumuamua was a passive scout that registered our level of development. And Tri-Atlas is the next stage, an active mission. When the Webb scientists ran a spectral analysis of the materials on Tri-Atlas's surface, they found something that doesn't fit any model. Traces of heavy metals like osmium and iridium in proportions that can only be found in one place in our solar system, in a specific class of asteroids believed to be fragments of Phaeton's core. It's like finding the victim's fingerprints on the murder weapon. Tri-Atlas didn't just fly past the place where the fifth planet died, it took a piece of it along. Maybe as a trophy, maybe as a sample for analysis, or maybe as fuel. Moreover, its current trajectory, after all the gravitational maneuvers, puts it on a very specific orbit. An orbit that, in a few years, will bring it to the L2 Lagrange point of the Earth-Sun system, a stable gravitational point, the perfect place for long-term observation. The same place where we put the James Webb Telescope. It's not just flying towards us, it's flying towards our eye that is looking at it. This is either an incredible coincidence or a mockingly precise calculation, a demonstration of superiority. And so, we are left with this knowledge. The asteroid belt might not just be a graveyard, it's a warning, a memorial left by someone else. Every fragment spinning in the dark screams about the fragility of a world, about how there are forces in the cosmos for which destroying an entire planet is either a routine operation, a side effect, or just a way to gather resources. We look at Tri-Atlas and see in it a reflection of our greatest hopes and darkest fears. Is this first contact? Or is it the return of the executioner? Is its silent glide through our system a prelude to dialogue, or to a verdict? Its secondary signal, aimed into deep space, becomes even more sinister in this context. If it destroyed Phaeton, who is it reporting to now? That the job is done? Or that a new problem has emerged? Perhaps the most terrifying truth is that we will never know the answer. Because to a mind capable of destroying worlds, our own mind might be nothing more than a curious but insignificant form of mold on the third rock from a star. It might not even notice, as it wipes us from existence while carrying out its ancient, incomprehensible task. The asteroid belt is silent. It has kept its secret for billions of years. But now, with Tri-Atlas in the sky, its silence seems deafening. This isn't the quiet of the void. It's the calm, before the storm. And we, holding our breath, wait for it to finally break, understanding that this time, we might not just be witnesses, but the epicenter. And then, next to Phaeton's grave, another will appear, the grave of Earth. And in the face of this existential, cold, mathematically calculated threat, humanity asks the only practical question: what can we do about it? The first instinct, the most ancient one, hardwired into our DNA, is to fight. Militaries around the world have undoubtedly already simulated thousands of scenarios, launching our most powerful nuclear warheads, a kinetic intercept with a swarm of high-velocity projectiles, maybe even exotic beam weapons still in the prototype stage. But this is all just desperate bravado. We are ants trying to punch a fist that's about to crush our anthill. We saw what happened to our probe when it tried to get too close. It wasn't shot down by a missile. It was repelled, neutralized by an energy field that acted with surgical precision. To send our arsenal against it is like firing a pistol at a battleship. Not only will we fail to harm it, but we will definitively confirm our hostile intentions. We will prove to the janitor that the infection is indeed dangerous. If fighting is pointless, maybe we should try talking. The second instinct is diplomacy. Projects like Metai, messaging to extraterrestrial intelligence, are shifting from theoretical to practical. We can try to respond in its mathematical language, send it our own sequences of prime numbers, the value of pi, maybe even encoded diagrams of our DNA and star system. But what would we say? We're here, we're intelligent, please don't kill us. That's a position of weakness, a plea. And what if our response is perceived not as a greeting, but as a challenge? Or worse, as a confirmation of our location for whatever comes next. To enter into a dialogue is to admit you're a player on the board. And we don't even know the rules of the game. Maybe the wisest thing to do when a tiger walks by is not to shout at it, but to stay very, very still. This brings us to the third option: hide. The dark forest concept, described by author Cixin Liu, has never been more relevant. The universe is a dark forest full of hunters, and the only way to survive is to stay silent, not to give away your presence. We could try to do that. Impose a global radio silence. Stop all transmissions into deep space. Turn off the lights of our planetary city. But isn't it too late? We've been making noise for a century. Our signals, like ripples in a pond, have spread 100 light years in all directions. Oumuamua might have already heard us and relayed the signal. Tri-Eye Atlas is already here. Hiding when the predator is already at your doorstep is a gesture of desperation, not a strategy. There's a fourth path, the most radical and perhaps the most insane. Not to fight, not to talk, and not to hide, but to accept. What if we're misinterpreting its intentions? What if the harvester isn't collecting matter, but information, consciousness? What if the janitor isn't destroying life, but suffering, chaos, entropy? This idea, bordering on science and mysticism, suggests that Tri-Eye Atlas is not a threat, but an opportunity. A chance for transformation, for a transition to the next level of existence, however incomprehensible it may be. Proponents of this view urge not to resist, but to resonate, to try to synchronize our own consciousness, our technologies, with its signals. It's a path into the absolute unknown, which could lead to either enlightenment or complete absorption. And finally, there's a fifth, most tragic and noble path. If none of the other options work, if destruction is inevitable, we can focus all our efforts not on saving ourselves, but on saving our memory. We can launch a fleet of new probes, Voyager's children, in millions of different directions. Tiny arc ships carrying not life, but its story. Our music, our literature, our science, our dreams. It won't save us, but it will ensure that our quiet, brief whisper in the universal silence doesn't vanish without a trace. It would be our final act of defiance, to turn our grave into a seed. None of these paths offer any guarantees. They are all just bets in a game with impossibly high stakes. And while governments and militaries and secret bunkers decide which card to play, the rest of the world has already started making its own choice. While the scientific and military circles frantically tried to find answers in data and equations, the rest of the world began to look for them elsewhere. Humanity, faced with the incomprehensible, did what it has always done. It turned to faith. For the first time in a century, scientific discourse gave way to a global spiritual awakening that was as powerful and unpredictable as Tri-Eye Atlas itself. The object's spiral trajectory, crossing sacred constellations, Orion, the Hunter, Draco, the Guardian, the Pleiades, the Seven Sisters, was immediately interpreted not as an astronomical coincidence but as a divine sign. The mathematical constants it transmitted, the golden ratio, pi, were no longer just numbers. They were seen as the Creator's signature, the universal language in which God spoke to the universe. Suddenly, ancient texts, from the Book of Revelation to the Vedic scriptures, were being studied with a new, desperate intensity. New cults sprang up around the world. In California, the children of Atlas gathered on mountaintops, meditating in unison with its 147-second pulse, believing they could communicate with it telepathically. In Japan, a syncretic sect merged Shintoism with astrophysics, proclaiming Tri-Eye Atlas, a kami, a divine spirit of the cosmos, returned to purify the earth. Their rituals involved building complex electronic circuits that they believed resonated with the object's signals. But the most profound upheavals occurred within established religions. The Vatican convened a secret conclave of astronomers, theologians, and exorcists to discuss what the Pope privately called the Imago Dei Cosmologica, the cosmological image of God. Was Tri-Eye Atlas an angel, a demon, or perhaps the Ark of the Covenant itself, not for humanity, but for all life in the universe? In Jerusalem, rabbis and Kabbalists studied the geometry of its fractal structure, claiming it corresponded to the tree of life and was a physical manifestation of divine order. Islamic scholars in Cairo pointed to verses in the Quran speaking of signs in the heavens and declared Tri-Eye Atlas the fulfillment of ancient prophecy. For many, it was the harbinger of a second coming. The seed ship, carrying the purest building blocks of life, was seen not as a biological threat, but as the return of the Garden of Eden. The activation of something in Antarctica and on the moon was not an invasion, but the awakening of sacred relics left here eons ago. They believed this was not the end of the world, but its transfiguration. But there was another, darker interpretation. For millions, Tri-Eye Atlas was not a savior, but a destroyer. Its low-frequency hum, resonating with the planet, was not a heartbeat, but a death knell. In biblical terms, it was called wormwood, the star that would fall from the sky and poison the waters. The flare-up over Antarctica and the signal to the moon were not activations, but the breaking of the seals of the apocalypse. These believers gathered in churches, mosques, and synagogues, praying for salvation not from the object, but from what it foretold. They saw in its mathematical precision not a divine order, but the cold, ruthless logic of a higher predator. The world split. Science could describe the what, but only faith dared to answer the why. And while scientists looked into their telescopes and generals looked at their tactical screens, billions of people looked up at the sky, and each saw something different. A savior, a destroyer, a creator. But they all agreed on one thing. What was approaching was not just technology. It was transcendent. Perhaps the deepest fear was not that Tri-Eye Atlas was an alien ship, but that it was something for which we didn't even have words. Something that existed at the intersection of physics and metaphysics, matter and spirit. What if its message was addressed not to our radio antennas, but to our souls? What if this was the ultimate test, not of our intelligence or our ability to survive, but of our capacity to face the true countenance of the divine or the diabolical? As Tri-Eye Atlas continued its silent, calculated dance through our system, humanity realized that the battle for the future would be fought not just in space, but within each of us. Because when the universe is listening, it might turn out that God is listening too. And his silence was more terrifying than any signal.